Staying consistent with your journaling doesn't necessarily mean touching every single journal you have every single day. So in this video, I wanted to show you what a week in my journals looks like. I have 9 notebooks in my journal lineup, ranging from the everyday touch of my everyday journal to the rarely or lesser used journal, which is my long-term collections journal. And in this video, I'm going to show you how I use all of those across the span of a week. Starting first with my everyday journal, as the name kind of suggests, this is a journal that I get into every single day. It's mainly used to hold things like tasks, events, happenings. It's where I put in my weekly and monthly plans, and it's also where I keep track of upcoming events. At the start of each day in particular, I do try and get in here to make sure I have a good understanding of the stuff that I want to get accomplished in that day, any plans that I have coming up, and also checking in with my weekly setup, which houses things like my priorities, the routines that I'm trying to build, and also my meal planner and tracker. Because the week that I was filming this video started on the 1st of the month, I also wanted to make sure to record my statistics from my various social media accounts. This is something that I like to keep track of because producing content for social media is my job, so I like to record the change in the statistics across each month. This one isn't housed in my everyday journal though, because it's not something I need to check in with every single day, and because I want to keep this data across the span of a year, I keep this in a journal that I call my yearly collections journal. As the name kind of suggests, that's for any collections that I have which span a year. So they're capturing data for a full year, or they're themed lists that I want to refresh every year. For instance, things like my 101 things list, which is 101 little goals that I have across the year, or my future me problems list, which I like to do a full check-in with at the end of each year, just to make sure that the stuff on there is stuff that I actually want to get done. For this journal check-in though, all I was doing was going and updating those analytics. I don't necessarily calculate the change in numbers for followers, subscribers, all of that every single time I do the analytics check-in. I normally like to batch that together after a few months, really just to save myself time, and I usually do all of those change calculations in Excel because it's a little bit easier. A little bit different for this analytics check-in, you can see here I'm adding a new space which is for the Bujo Buddies book club. We recently decided to move that over to its own Discord server rather than it being housed in our regular community Discord server, mainly because I know we had a lot of members that were part of the server who were really just there for the book club, so having it in its own separate space seemed like a good idea. The next journal I'm checking in with though is my 5-year journal, and it might seem like quite a lot of different journals that I'm checking in with just in this initial check-in, but that's because this check-in was at the very start of a month, which means it's a really good opportunity to make sure I'm giving myself that fresh slate feeling, make sure that everything is updated so that moving forward I don't feel like I'm behind on anything. While my 5-year journal is something that I typically like to check in with at the end of each day, it had been a couple of days since I'd gone and filled that one in, so I was taking this as an opportunity to get back on track. In this notebook I have 3 lines to write down things that happened for each day across a 5-year span of time. So here you can see I'm filling in the stuff for June 27th to June 30th, just making sure that all of my entries for this year are updated. Over on the next page though, that's where the next 4 days are going to be, so the 1st of July to the 4th of July, and I already have things filled in there because they were from the same time last year. Now, speaking about getting up to date, one of the journals that I feel very behind in is my reading journal, which is technically a reading/stories journal, because I also put things like TV shows, movies, games in here as well, but because I am super behind in doing all of my little blurb reviews for each of those stories, I wanted to take this as an opportunity to jump in there as well. Across this week I was actively trying to get myself back up to date because I had something like 31 little blurbs that weren't done, and given the fact that they take me a little bit of time to complete, that's quite a lot of work to do. Rather than doing it all at once in a very large journaling session, I figured I'd split it up across the week and try and see how much I could achieve. Jumping back into my everyday journal though, we're filling in my monthly pages. This step wouldn't necessarily be something that I'd have to do every single day in my journal, because it really only happens at the start of the month. As said, we were filming this one on the first day of the month, so it needed to be done. I do try to make sure that my calendar page in particular is as up to date as possible come the start of the month, so I can get a really good overview of everything that's going to be happening. And on this one, I don't just capture events or appointments, but I also like to put in my content releases too. Previously I've had this on a separate layout, but I figured it would just make more sense to bring them all together because I was really good at using the content calendar and not so good at using my monthly log in general, so by combining them, I'm hoping that I'll get better at using both. The monthly log and I have had an interesting relationship. It's one of those layouts that I can't really seem to give up, even though I don't necessarily use it as fully as I would like to. In the instances where I've tried to leave the monthly log out of my setup, I've found myself missing it, but then the majority of times when I set it up, I don't really use it. One of the things that I'm trying to do this month in particular is be a little bit more vigilant about coming in and checking things off, and also updating it when plans are made. So you'll see that across this video, I do flip back to this page a lot more often than I would probably usually do, and that's because I am actively trying to use it. As you might have seen from the little title we had on screen before, this check-in wasn't actually at the start of the day like our previous footage was. Instead, it was more so in the middle of the day. Now, I haven't filmed a middle of the day check-in for every single day across this week, but for this first day in particular, I was kind of easing myself into the new month, into the new quarter, and doing a bit more journaling than a typical day. You'll see in some of the days that are coming up later in the video, the journaling sessions in those are a lot shorter. Now, another special thing about this check-in in particular is that I'm not only moving into a new month, but I was also moving into a new journal. And that means taking my previous journal and essentially archiving it by putting it on my shelf. Meaning I'm not really going to be looking back at that one unless I want to pull it out to show an idea in a video, or check in with something that's very specific. That means what I want to do is go through the pages of the last month in particular and make sure that I've pulled out anything that hasn't been completed, anything that needs to go somewhere else, whether that be in my new everyday journal or in one of my other journals. Maybe my yearly collections, long-term collections, wherever that information is going to be most suited to. Effectively, all this involves, this migration process, is going through all of the pages of that previous month and making sure that anything that hasn't been touched, any of those open task bullets, the ones that haven't been started or completed, those ones I'm pulling out onto a separate notebook, which is just a nice kind of little scribble book that I have, one that I don't need to be particularly neat or don't feel compelled to be particularly neat in, and I can jot those down there so then they can be moved into a more appropriate place later. This kind of splits the migration process into two halves, so one of them being pulling out the tasks that aren't complete, and the other one being organizing them and putting them away. Originally, I was just going to do this for the past month, but then I decided, well, if I'm going to the effort to do it for June, I might as well do it for the rest of the journal as well. I knew there were probably still some tasks in there that might still be relevant, and I'm not transferring every single open task into the scribble book. I'm only pulling out the ones that are still necessary, still relevant, still something that I want to do. Any of the ones that get transferred to that list, I just indicate with a little arrow, so turning that dot bullet into the little arrow to signify that it has been moved or migrated. There are some tasks that I decided don't really need to be done, those ones I just put a little line through, or eventually I just got to the point where it wasn't really that big a deal if they didn't have their bullet changed, so I just left them as a regular bullet. If you're a little bit more vigilant about this monthly migration process and going through each month as they pass, then you don't need to do quite as much work as I'm doing here. But the first half of the year has felt a little bit hectic. I'm not sure if that's just a me feeling, let me know in the comments if you felt the same, but I've noticed that my journaling routines have felt a little bit unsettled, possibly. That's also probably in part because this year I decided to change my journaling system, so rather than doing monthly planning, I decided to go with a cyclic system, so having focus periods of 28 days rather than months. There are also probably some other factors as well, but that one I know has probably played a part. Once I'd gone through the entire journal though, I could put it back onto my shelf and consider the tasks that I've pulled out and where they need to go next. Rather than go through each of the entries individually and consider where they needed to go and then put them in those places, I decided to go through the list as a whole and pull out all of the ones that should go in my future me problems list. This is a list of things that I don't want to necessarily do today or this week or even this month, but I still want them to get done at some point, so I want a space to save them so when I get around to being able to do them, I can easily find them again. My future me problems list is held in my yearly collections journal, and as I mentioned before, I like to have it in here because each year I like to go through that list and just make sure that everything on there is still relevant, still something that I'd like to do. Otherwise, I find that some of the tasks become a little bit obsolete, my interests change, so I don't really ever want to get around to doing them. By making the Future Me Problems collection an annual list, it gives me that set check-in point to consider the tasks a bit more closely. Some of the items that I had in the list belonged in other spaces in the yearly collections journal though, in particular the home projects list and also possibly on the 101 things list, but I just wanted to get all of the items off of that migration list into this yearly collections journal before I took the rest of the tasks and put them in my everyday journal. To make things a little bit easier on myself, I made sure to go through the list and cross off or strike out any of the ones that had already been transferred, and all of those ones with asterisks, those are the ones that in particular I need to now put into my everyday journal. Anything that felt project based, and in particular a project that I want to tackle this month, I added to my projects list, which is one of the first collections that I have in my monthly setup, whereas the other items just got added to a little migration list that I put on my daily log. They weren't necessarily going to get done on this day, in fact most of them don't get done on this day, but there's something that I want to do in the not so distant future. I don't want to do them at say the end of the month, I also want to do them within the next week. The ones on the projects list though, those are ones that are going to happen at some point in the month, and they're also ones that require multiple tasks to do. The items I'm adding to my daily log though, those are more so just individual tasks. Now as said, this does probably seem like quite a lot of journaling to just do in one day, and that's because this type of process isn't something that I would do on an everyday basis. Migration processes like this really just happen at the end of a journal or at the end of a month, whereas a more regular daily or weekly routine is what we're getting into in future check-ins. The end of the day is a great time for a journal check-in, just to make sure that we've gone through and actually crossed off anything we've done, considered anything that didn't get done, whether it still warrants being on our list, and also getting ourselves set up for the day ahead. That's typically what I like to do when it comes to an evening journal check-in, so making sure to add in a header for the new day and jot down a couple of things that I know I want to do. That way when it comes to getting into my work tomorrow, I can hit the ground running. I also like to make sure that I've checked in with any trackers that I'm keeping, whether they be for routines and habits or for meal plans, meal logs. And this would also be a good opportunity to check any front of journal trackers, but because I had done a lot of journaling on this day, I didn't flip back to check in with any of those. Often when I make front of journal trackers, I usually try and make them the kind of thing that I don't have to check in with every single day, because I'm not very good at turning back to my front of journal pages, at least not on a daily basis, so not checking in with it on day one is not so much of a problem. What I do want to make sure I'm on top of though is my 5-year journal, so we're getting into that one and writing down just 3 lines about what happened in the day. This one is a super quick process. I usually actually keep this journal by my bed rather than at my desk where we're doing the filming, but for the purposes of actually getting to show you what this process looks like, I've been keeping it in my office for this week. On to day 2 though, and the first thing I'm doing is checking in with my everyday journal to make sure I know what's going on for the day ahead. By the point of getting to my check-in, I'd actually already done some of the tasks, so I could cross some of them off, and I wanted to make sure to check back in with my weekly dashboard of priorities, routines, and meals to make sure I was keeping those top of mind as well. As we talked about before, I am trying to be a little bit more vigilant with checking in with my monthly log, so I wanted to briefly run my eyes over that, just check off anything that happened yesterday, and add anything that was going to happen today. To fill in all of my regular text in this journal, I'm using the Zebra Sarasa Mark-On, mainly because my regular Papermate Inkjoy is just a little bit too inky for this paper. The paper in this notebook feels a little bit more coated compared to what I'm used to, so ink takes a little bit longer to dry, and I found so far that the Sarasa Mark-On is doing a good job of drying quickly so I don't smudge all of my work. I do miss my Papermate Inkjoy though, but it's okay because I'm going to be using that in my reading journal. You know those tasks that you build up in your head is going to be a total mountain to climb? The ones that are going to take such a long time and they're going to be such a burden and a hassle? That is what I have built up my little blurb writing to be. Those little reviews that I want to do for the stories that I've been reading and watching, I think that the sheer volume of them had made them very, very daunting, but just getting in and doing one a day for as many days as it takes me has been a really good strategy. On some days I did manage to get in and do multiple, but on this day I just stuck to one, and I wanted to jump back into my yearly collections journal, which is not usually a daily touch, but I managed to miss one of the migrated tasks from the day before, so I needed to add it in. That was the AM check-in, and throughout the day I did use my journal, went in, crossed things off, added things to my task list, all of that kind of stuff. but trying to stop what I'm doing to record a very small piece of footage, like adding one task to my task list every so often throughout the day, would have been quite a mission. By the time I finished filming for the week, I had 5 hours of journaling footage, and once I'd gone and trimmed out all of the parts where I was, not really doing anything, just sitting there with my camera rolling and not actually touching my journal, it was only 3 hours 50, but that's still quite a bit to get through without also having to add on all of the little bits and pieces throughout the day. I figured that a check-in at the start and end of the day, and then the occasional midday check-in across the week, still gives a really good impression of how my journaling actually goes. I try to leave my everyday journal open, face up on my desk wherever possible, meaning that anytime I have a thought, I can just add it to my daily log nice and quickly. But here you can see I'm working on my actions list. The actions list is where I put any of the actions that I want to take as related to my goals across the month. This one is populated from the actions list or action plans, which I have in my goals journal. That's where I go through each of my goals individually, consider things like what do I actually want to achieve as part of this goal, how am I going to do that, what steps do I need to take either once or on a monthly, weekly, or daily basis to work on the goal. And I'm transferring ones into here that are in particular either once-off or weekly tasks. Anything that's daily is more so recorded in my routine tracker, which I've already set up, and as of current I don't have any tasks that are related to my goals that are monthly in their frequency, but if I ever did have any of those, they'd be added to this list as well. Normally I would like to have those goal actions populated before the first of the month, but as mentioned, I've had a little bit of a weird time with my planning recently. The last week of June felt like a bit of a hodgepodge of different stuff going on, so the planning routines that I would typically have had in that period, the things that I would have already populated into my journal before I started filming this video, didn't really happen. Here though we have the PM check-in for day 2, and as expected we are starting with the everyday journal. This time around, rather than just working on the monthly and daily pages, I also made sure to flip back and check in with those start of journal pages. A lot of these are related to my work and making sure that I'm getting content out when I say I'm going to, and also future events and things like that. And just like I'm trying with the monthly log to be better about actually filling it in, I'm aiming to do the same with those start of journal pages as well. Here I'm working on my 25 before 2025 list before quickly turning on to my video releases list. Normally I would have had my video releases list as part of my monthly setup pages, but for this journal I've been trying something a little bit different and putting it as part of a start of journal setup, mainly to kind of cut down on some redundancy in setting up the same pages time and time again, where they could really just be combined into one overall layout. So far it's working fairly well, but we are only about a week and a half into using the layout at this stage, so it certainly does need some more testing. I wanted to make sure that I did not miss my 5-year journal check-in, because it's only the second day of the week. It would be a little bit sad to miss the second day. I'm not necessarily perfect about getting in and checking in with this one every single day, but I do try to, because I do want to make sure I keep up to date on that, mainly because it's a little hard to remember too many days after the fact as to what happened on each day. Let me know if you're that way inclined. I find it very difficult to remember what happened yesterday if I don't write it down, and I want this 5-year journal to be a fairly accurate record of the stuff that was happening for me, whether it be little wins, time spent with peers, or anything like that. I always aim to fill that in as close to the day as possible. Sometimes it's the day after, maybe if I went to bed particularly late and just didn't want to do the check-in, or if I just genuinely forgot. But sometimes I do have to do it a couple of days after the fact because stuff just comes up. In the instances where I don't have my 5-year journal with me, sometimes I'll just make a note on my phone at the end of the day as to what happened. That way I can then go add those entries in when I next have the journal near me. While this seems to work well for my 5-year journal, I don't find the same system to work as well for my everyday journal. For instance, if I'm not at my desk or I'm not near my everyday journal, can't really easily write something down, but I have a thought about a task that I would like to do at some point. Sometimes I do message this to myself via like Facebook Messenger or something, but very rarely do I actually go back and check in with those. I need to find a better system for recording tasks when I don't have my journal handy. If you have any tips, I would love to hear about them, because sometimes, yeah, your journal is just not available or you're not in a position to write something down, and all too often those ideas will just slip out of our heads into the ether, never to be seen again. It's not really an ideal situation and very much one I would like to try and combat. Here though we have the AM check-in for day 3, which was a Wednesday, and the fun thing that relates to my journals and Wednesdays is that on Wednesday I have what is called Bujo Wednesday. This is where my friends and I get together and just have some journaling time. We essentially just rotate through each other's houses, having a journaling session at one person's one week and then another person's the next, another person's the next. It's really just a fun way to catch up and do some journaling together. Sometimes it doesn't actually involve journaling, sometimes we watch Bridgerton, but most of the time we at least get our journals out of our bags. It does mean that on the Wednesday I didn't have a PM check-in because by the time I usually get home from Bujo Wednesday, after doing a bunch of journaling at somebody else's house, I'm usually not so inclined to get into my journals. Often I'll also do my kind of regular journal check-in at my friend's house. Or if Bujo Wednesday is at mine, I'll do it at mine, but not usually at my desk. Normally I get home from Bujo Wednesday around bedtime, so I don't usually check in with my journal when I get home, I just go straight to bed. But in terms of packing my journals for Bujo Wednesday, what I take on any given week kind of depends on what I want to work on. I try to make sure to decide in advance what it is I'm going to work on when I get there, just so I don't have to take all of my journals with me. This time around I took my everyday journal, my 5-year journal. I also ended up taking my reading or stories journal so that I could do some check-ins with that too. And just in case I wanted to do anything on my iPad, I also took that along with my mini keyboard. All of these along with my pencil case of supplies just get bundled up into my carry bag. This carry bag was made by my mum, and it nicely fits up to about 4 journals in there. But this time it was 3 journals, an iPad, a pencil case, and a keyboard. As far as packing for Bujo Wednesday is concerned, the only things that I pack that come pretty much every single time would be my everyday journal and my pencil case. Everything else is decided based upon what projects I want to do. For this Bujo Wednesday in particular, I thought it would be a great opportunity to tackle more of my reading journal blurbs, and I made really good progress on these. At the start of the week I had something like 22 that I still needed to do, and by the end of Bujo Wednesday I'd gotten this down to 9. Don't mind me just showing off the progress that I made in this clip here, but as mentioned I didn't do a PM check-in for day 3, so this one is our AM check-in for day 4. I wanted to keep the train rolling with my blurb writing, so I decided to do one more of those before jumping back into my everyday journal. It probably goes without saying, but in a typical week I do not check in with my reading journal every single day. Ideally, I would only be checking in with it anytime I finish a book, movie, TV show, and want to write down my blurb or record the fact that I have consumed that piece of media. I did get a bit of a slow start in my journal for the year though, because I was kind of toying with the idea of turning it into a stories journal, and I didn't want to just put books in if I had other TV shows and movies that I wanted to include. And since then I've pretty much been playing catch up. Maybe slight spoilers, but I did not manage to fully catch up in the week that I was filming being in my journals, but I am very close to it and I'm hoping to keep that train rolling, make sure that I get myself fully caught up before we get to mid-month, and then hopefully from there on out I'll be a little bit more regular in finishing off my reading blurbs as I finish my reads. It is so hard to remember after the fact how I felt about them. I do try and make sure that my blurbs that I'm writing aren't very spoiler heavy, mainly because if anybody did decide to have a bit of a closer look at it, I don't want to ruin any plot points for them. But I am considering changing my tune on that because, I mean, it is my reading journal and it is supposed to be for me, so it would be nice to be able to reflect on those things. I just know that I'm really sensitive to spoilers and I don't want to spoil anybody else's experience of those different stories. Here in the everyday journal though, we're doing our regular check-in, just writing down tasks and happenings and meals and whatever else, making sure that I know what is coming up for the day so that I can hit the ground running. Normally Thursdays are one of my worst days in terms of productivity, but for this Thursday in particular, I woke up with the intention of making it a good day. I decided I was not going to let my typical low motivation, low energy type style ruin things for me. I've decided to make it a soft focus to try and get ahead on video content this month, mainly because now as we're in the second half of the year, we are approaching Vlogmas. And yes, I do know it is still several months away at this stage, but it pays to be prepared, and if I can get myself ahead on my content at this stage, it means that when I get to December, I'm gonna have a much easier time than I did last year. As part of my journaling for day 4 though, I was doing a lot of work in my R&D journal. This is my research and development journal, where I mainly go and make layouts that I'm doing in videos for the channel. This one in particular was cleaning related layouts, which is going to be a video that's coming out soon. So if you want to make sure that you don't miss out on that one, be be sure to subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. But because I spent so much time and energy making those layouts throughout the day, and then also filming the video for it, it meant that when it came to a PM check-in, I was pretty zonked. I instead decided to take the evening off from doing journaling, just spending some time with Vogel instead, and came back the next morning to check things off and get my next layout set up. As you'll have seen so far, I primarily like to use daily logs rather than full weekly setups. I do have a little weekly dashboard that has the priorities list, routines, and my meals, but in terms of general tasks and when I'm going to do them, those all happen on the daily logs. Because I've pretty much run out of space on the previous spread, I need to set up a new one. So on this page, I'm first going in with a light brown Tombow and highlighting every second line. This is one of my favorite things to do in my journal. I love the way it looks, I like how it adds some color to the page and just some kind of general visual interest, but it can also be a really good accessibility tool, making it just that bit easier to read my task lists. In terms of the decoration on these ones, I'm just using some PET stickers. Those ones are from Journal Say, and I've tried to link any of the materials I used throughout the week in the description box, just in case you wanted to grab any of those for yourself. One of the things I really appreciate about the stickers is that it makes decorating these dailies so very easy. It doesn't require too much planning on my part or any kind of heavy doodling, decoration, that kind of thing. It's really just pick out the stickers I want and slap them into place, giving me much more time to write things down. The first things that I'm going to be writing on this new spread is actually migrating any of my unfinished tasks from the previous one over. That way, when I'm using this spread, I don't have to flip back and forth between this one and the last one to see any of those tasks that I haven't quite finished off. But one of the things that happened when I was migrating this is that I wasn't really paying much attention to how straight I was writing some of my text, in particular in that indented list under the budgeting task that I've put in. Those ones started to go a little bit skew-if, little cattywampus, and while sometimes I can make my peace with some messiness, this one, it just stood out like a sore thumb and I couldn't deal with it. Thankfully though, we do have an easy fix for this, and I'm just going to be using some white sticker labels. The nice part about these is that because they have a texture that's kind of similar to the journal paper already, I can go over that with the brown marker that I was using, and it gives me a very close match to what I've got in the journal. That way, when I cut the sticker to size and stick it over the top of the text that I'm trying to cover, it makes that mistake fix fairly hard to see, which is kind of ideal. I want it to blend into the page as seamlessly as possible, so it's not an eyesore, it doesn't kind of stand out compared to the rest of the stuff I have on the page, and I use this trick quite a few times throughout the week, whether it be to fix mistakes like this one, or cover up smudges anytime I didn't let my ink dry long enough. It is definitely my favorite mistake fix. Part of the reason that I was prioritizing this migration though is so that I don't have the same issue happen in this journal as I got in the last journal. Having to do that very large migration process at the start of this week to go through the entire of the journal and make sure things had been transferred over really just highlighted the fact that I should probably be doing some smaller migration processes throughout the life of the journal rather than just doing it all at the end. Even though it's just going from one spread to the next, having those migrated tasks in their own box helps to highlight to me that those are ones that I've been putting off, so it gives me an opportunity to reflect and say, okay, if I'm putting them off, is it because they're too hard? Is it because they're actually not super necessary for right now? Is it because they don't need to be done at all? Especially when it comes to setting up the next spread, once I've finished using the one that I literally just set up. If I'm re-migrating those tasks, then it's kind of an indicator that something isn't right. Now as that spread is set up though, it's time to go through the rest of my pages and start to check off things that are happening, get things updated. This was another day that in particular I decided to turn to the front of the journal and update some of the collections that I had in there, and I'm feeling very good about the fact that I am getting in and checking things off there. I'm hoping that I can use that good feeling as a reminder that yes, I should turn back to the front of my journal and check those collections off more often. As said at the start of this video, I have 9 notebooks in my lineup. We have the Everyday Journal, which we're obviously working in here, the Yearly Collections, which we've already seen, the Scribble Book, which yes, I do count, that one we also saw, and I really just use it for anything that I want to do that's particularly messy or doesn't really need to be kept. We have my reading or stories journal, the goals journal that we saw briefly when I was writing in my actions list, the R&D or research and development journal that I use for video ideas, the 5-year journal that's also featured so far in this video, But the other journal I have is my physical health journal. This one is the newest addition to my lineup, and it's mainly a place for me to set my goals as related to my physical health journey, take down notes related to the different areas of research I'm doing that's also related to physical health, and kind of just plan how I want to tackle my physical health goals. There is also another journal that we've had previously on the channel, but doesn't feature in this video, and that's because I've actually kind of retired it from my lineup, or at least I'm considering retiring it. That one is my PD journal, or professional development, and this is where I take down notes from pieces of media that I consume for learning purposes. I'm kind of considering retiring this journal though, because it hasn't been getting a lot of use, and I also feel like it might just make more sense to keep all of those notes digitally rather than in a journal that I have to handwrite. While the handwriting aspect does make me be a little bit more streamlined in how much information I'm taking down, it also makes the information a little bit harder to access in terms of making connections between different ideas and being able to like link back to the places that I found that information. I'm thinking that I might set something up in Notion instead, but at this stage it's just sitting on my art cart, patiently waiting until I decide what I'm going to do with it. I do definitely like the idea of a professional development journal, or technically you could think of it as a personal development journal depending on what kind of information you were recording in there, but I do think it might just be a little bit easier to have this one digitally. As for our evening check-in on day 5, I'm of course getting in, checking off anything that got accomplished during the day, and I'm also adding what I call a micro or mini collection down the bottom of this layout. I really enjoy having these scattered in amongst my dailies, in part because of visual interest and also just to kind of see what was going on at the time if I ever come and look back at these layouts. I think it's a very simple way to make my daily log pages look a little bit different from each other, and still in a very functional way. The mini collection that I added here though is just a packing list for Saturday, and that's because I was going to a friend's house for a colouring date. This is effectively just an opportunity to get together and watch some movies, do some kind of chill creativity tasks. It's the first one we've ever done and it was so much fun. I don't personally own any colouring books, so thankfully my friend was very generous to supply a colouring page for me. I think we were all a little ambitious in terms of how much we thought we were going to get done, because the friend with the colouring books, Rachel, bought 13 colouring books along, and I didn't even finish a half of one spread. I will say though, I was very pleased with my efforts. Day 6 was that colouring date, but our hangout didn't start till midday, so still plenty of time to do an AM check-in in my journals. Because I hadn't set up a daily log the day before, I started off with that, so just adding in any of the tasks that I knew I needed to do, and also made sure to go back and check in with that weekly dashboard to add in my meal plan, check off my routines, all of that kind of thing. For this check-in though, I figured that there was probably a pretty good chance that I wasn't going to be checking in the evening, so I took the opportunity to do a little bit extra journaling compared to usual, or at least compared to a usual morning check-in. Oftentimes at the start of the day I'm so kind of rearing to go with my tasks that I make my journal check-ins quite short, really just seeing what I wrote down the day before and writing in any other ideas I've had for tasks that I want to do throughout the day, and then I get straight on into work. Sometimes, actually probably more often than I mean to, I kind of forego my AM check-in to get straight into work, even though I know doing an AM check-in is going to be so much more beneficial for actually using my time effectively. But anytime I feel quite pressured and busy in particular, I trick myself into thinking, no, you don't have time to write down your plans, you just need to go and take action. But if I just took the small amount of time, say 5 minutes, to do a journal check-in, I would end up spending my time much more effectively. This is something I just need to keep reminding myself time and time again. Eventually it will stick, but sometimes we just need to learn these lessons multiple times over. In terms of this AM check-in though, I of course had my everyday journal, and I also did another little blurb in my reading journal, but after that I jumped back into my yearly collections to check out some of the things I had in there that haven't been updated in a while. I do definitely need to do a bigger update in this journal at some stage, hopefully some stage soon, but I wanted to make sure that I went in and checked out some of those yearly collections that have set update points, for instance my goal summaries and writing down which goals I'm working on in any of the quarters of the year, and also the ones with trackers like my 24/24s in 2024. This one is a list of 24 things that I want to do 24 times across the year. Some of them I'm making excellent progress on, other ones not so much, but for each of them I not only like to record how many times I've done on each of the things, but also a little bit more information about each of those instances. So yes, I may have watched 24 movies, but what movies were they? I want to do 24 items on my future me problems list, but which 24 tasks have I gotten done? This one needs more of an update than I was willing to give it in the moment, but I also wanted to check in with my long-term collections journal. This is one we haven't seen in the video so far, and it is definitely one of those journals that I do not check in with every day or even every week. And that's because I really only check in with this journal when I need to. The main times when I check in with this journal is when I need to reference some of the information in there, mainly my swatch pages that are at the back, or if I wanted to add information to one of the collections. For this one in particular, I was adding an entry into the shit I always say list, which is funnily enough, just a list of stuff that I constantly say. Things like, we love savings, and persnickety biscuit, and in this case I was writing down, good luck other drivers. I like to say that when I'm making a strange or dumb or just questionable decision, but that's all I had for this check-in, and it was time to go on my colouring date. As predicted, I didn't have a PM check-in on day 6, mainly because after our colouring date, I didn't get home until like midnight, so there was no way that I was going to be getting into my office to get into my journal. And for day 7, Vogel, my partner, had planned us a date day, so I didn't have a lot of time to journal on that day either. Really, all I did for my AM check-in was go into my everyday journal and write down the things that I was planning on doing that day, and also put a couple updates on my weekly dashboard and also on my summer creative retreat list. The Summer Creative Retreat is coming up in August. I'm very excited to be involved. I'm going to be leading a workshop as part of that. It is a free event, it is a lot of fun, so stay tuned for more details. Because it was date day though, I didn't get into my journal all that much throughout the day to write things down, or check things off, or really do anything kind of productivity focused. Vogel and I went out for Yumcha, we played some board games, watched a movie, had chips and dip. It was a good day. But so that I could hit the ground running come the Monday, I wanted to make sure that my journal was set up for the week ahead. This meant making sure that my current weekly dashboard was fully filled in, writing items into my future log and also my start of journal pages to indicate what had happened throughout the week, and also set up my weekly dashboard for the week ahead. Although it doesn't necessarily happen every single week, I love the way a full weekly dashboard looks. Having all of the different trackers filled in, having my meal log up to date. Previously, things like my routine tracker and my meal log were done on a monthly basis, and keeping those ones up to date and full come the end of the month was always a bit of a struggle point. Having these done on a weekly basis though feels a little bit more approachable. It's a little bit more likely that I'm going to get in and fill them into completion, rather than a monthly layout which has considerably more days and thus more information that I need to record. Making that change from monthly to weekly has done a lot in terms of my journal use, but also a lot in terms of just paying attention to the things that I'm tracking. This is something that I've come to very much appreciate about journaling, is that different styles are going to work better for different people, and even for us as individuals, different styles will work better at different points in our lives. Previously, I've had great success with monthly trackers, but in recent months, not so much, which is why I'm mainly going towards weekly ones. Now as I've done the general journal updates though, it's time to go and set up that next weekly dashboard. This one is going to have all of the same sections that we had on the last weekly dashboard, so the priorities list, the routine tracker, and the meal planner / log, but I wanted to change up the structure of this because the meal log / planner in particular really wasn't working as well as I had hoped. I kind of knew going into setting up the layout that original time that it wasn't going to be the final form of the layout, and I'm hoping that the second iteration of this is going to work better. Rather than having columns for each of the different meals, so snack, breakfast, lunch, dinner, I'm instead going to have columns based on the plan versus what I actually eat. I do think that making that change is going to make using the layout a lot easier, hopefully leading to less mistakes on my part, but I can also foresee maybe needing to tweak it come the end of next week as well. To make everything fit nicely though with the way that I put the meal plan in, this meant that my priorities list section had to be a lot longer. Now I don't know how I feel about this because in my mind if you have priorities, I mean technically you can't have multiple priorities because there's only one priority that you put above everything else, but putting that aside, I'm thinking that across the week I'm not going to have as many priorities as I have lines on this list, which may lead to a bit of a kind of dilution of my focus. I'm hoping that's not the case, I'm hoping that doesn't happen, but we'll have to wait and see. I'm trying to make sure that I don't hold myself to filling in the entire of the list, because that will definitely dilute my focus, but in terms of my routines, I didn't have any more than the ones that I wanted to track from the previous week. I did change up the orientation of this routine tracker though, so instead of having the habits or routines go down the left-hand side, I'm putting the days of the week instead, mainly because I want to count how many instances of having completed each routine I've done, rather than how many I completed on each day. Along the bottom though, the open space there was opportunity to put in some decoration. Again, just using some washi tape and the PET stickers that I used to decorate the last spread as well. On the right hand side of the spread, this is just where I'm going to continue those daily logs once I've finished off the space on the previous spread. This does mean that the daily log for Monday isn't on the same layout as the weekly dashboard, but that doesn't bother me too much, they're still fairly close to each other. Finishing off the decoration on my weekly dashboard though, now although we checked in with quite a range of my journals, there was one that we didn't really check in with. In this video we looked at my everyday journal, my yearly and long-term collections, my reading journal and 5-year journal both got to be on camera, and we even had a short appearance from my R&D journal. But one that didn't get featured is my physical health journal. This one is the newest addition to my lineup, and we do have a setup video on the channel for it, so if you were curious to see what that one looks like, the kind of layouts I've included, what I'm using it for, then this video is the next one to check out. I'm actually really excited for this journal, even though it's not going to be the kind of one that I use on a daily basis, so click or tap on this video and I'll see you over there.